Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to our second edition of our EV Charging Minds podcast. Very happy to have today with me Andy Bennett. He's leading Driivz, one of the most well-known players in the EV industry, and very happy to discuss with him today about the latest trends, the latest developments in our industry. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you, Christian. It's great to get a chance to talk to you. So I came on board to manage the Driivz business about almost 3 years ago. And actually, the company that I manage is called Evolve. It's the combination of both Driivz, which of course focuses on charge point management software, and a company called Sparkion, which really spends most of their time on local power management. Today, we really combined those two companies into one company called Evolve. My background, I've worked for really big companies. I've worked for really small companies. I moved out here. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. I moved out here about 18 years ago to take over a software company that built software for the electric utility industry. Ultimately, I ended up at a large European company, Schneider Electric, where I had responsibility of a lot of the automation work that takes place there, a lot of the medium voltage, a lot of the things you think about from a grid perspective. So a lot of my background in energy, I did spend some time in my career working at IBM. I have responsibility for all the sales of AI applications at IBM. So I've had this long history of sort of working in the software industry, but the software industry that directly interacts with things related to hardware. And so when I had a chance to come into Vontier, that's our parent company, and run Driivz, I looked at it as just an incredible opportunity to think about how do you develop software? How do you think about software that has to interact with a whole ecosystem of connected assets? And of course, you have to also think about the energy that's consumed and the energy that's needed to manage those networks. So it's been a really exciting 3 years for me. That's a little bit of my background and kind of how I ended up in this position.
Thanks, Andy. Super insightful. And do you still remember how your first day was when you then joined Evolve? How was it to then take over such a role? Because we all know that Evolve is, as said, one of the most experienced players in the industry. I think as subject, we have the pleasure of working with you at your team since 2014. So really in our early days, we started the collaboration. So how was it to take over the company and lead the company for you on your first day?
Yeah, it was exciting. I think, on a personal level, I've always loved technology, but it's important to me that I'm at a company that is doing something positive, right, for the environment and for sustainability. That's our mission statement at Driivz, is to help with electrification. Not just because we think it's good business, of course it's good business, but because it's in the long run going to be better for decarbonization and the things that quite frankly matter to me. So my first day on the job was in Israel. So literally the first day was there. A lot of our staff is in Israel. Today, we're a global company. Actually, Driivz and Evolve are headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. So today we've really, over the last 3 years, we've diversified the company. So we have resources really all over the world as we've continued to do that. But my first day was spent there meeting the staff, sitting down, understanding what the challenges were. It's a company that has been doubling and every single year, both in terms of number of customers, number of chargers we manage, and number of employees. So very fast paced, very exciting. It was a really, when I look back at all my first days on the job, it was probably one of the coolest, just to get to know the people, to get to know the staff, and just to meet folks that are, just so dedicated to the work that they're doing. Yeah, it feels like a long time ago now that you asked the question, but it was a little less than 3 years ago, so it wasn't that long ago.
Indeed. Yeah, some of this industry turns all of us into a bit more mature people, especially for the ones like you who are already staying for some
Well,
time in
I'm
business.
not more mature. I'm just older.
Hopefully also more experience as well. At least that's my hope. We see the whole customer journey is still a bit, let's say, sometimes broken, right? There could be definitely better ways how we can provide a more seamless customer experience. And of course, we also see a lot of other topics. From your point of view, leading such an important company like Evolve, what are for you the main factors which is still limiting us a bit reaching the mass market environment?
First of all, I believe the data does support it. As an industry, and you've been doing this a lot longer than I have, Christian, what you guys have accomplished in where we are with reliability today is pretty fantastic. I mean, if you think about the duration of time to where the industry has arrived, what uptimes look like, these are pretty impressive statistics. So I think there's a tendency for us as an industry sometimes to beat ourselves up, but my parent company, Vontier, we have some really large, corporations there. Gilbarco Veeder-Root's been making gas pumps for over 100 years, right? I mean, so they've had a lot of time to figure out, billing and payments and fuel right. And I think in some ways, we've been catching up to that. I think with a lot of our customers, even 5 years ago, the only conversations we were having was around uptime and reliability of those networks. I do think that's starting to evolve. And as a company like ours, a lot of the work we've been doing is what can you build into the software? What self-healing algorithms can you put in place to fix problems as they occur? Because there's always going to be problems in the communication and the hardware. That's just the nature of the system. The idea is to fix those without human intervention as quickly as you can. And not just without human intervention, but, hopefully without anyone ever knowing that there was ever a problem. That's a lot of what we spend our time on. It's kind of I think we're sort of moving past that as being the base level expectations. Clearly, hardware is getting better, reliability is getting better, software is getting better. So all that's really positive. But you did hit on one other theme, and it's an important one. When we sit down with our large customers and our small customers, and they talk to us about NPS and the satisfaction of their customers, I think in the past we were a little bit binary about that. And what I mean is, did someone charge and did they not charge? And therefore, we checked the box and we assume, those folks were happy and successful. On our platform, we're getting close to over 200,000 chargers, sitting on the Driivz platform. And so we're privy to a lot of data across a lot of charge point operators, across a lot of different chargers, 2,000 different types of chargers, and over almost 40 countries. And now what we can see by looking at the data is there are other problems that directly affect that NPS. And one of the ways that I think we can continue to make EV charging better and to look at this is things like first time right. So we can see in the data, for instance, that someone may have plugged in, but something went wrong. And that could have been the handshake. It could have been delay to the payment system. There's lots of things that could have happened. And they take that charger back out, they put the charger back in, then maybe they do that several times. Ultimately, they end up with a successful charging episode. But it might have been a really, really, really frustrating experience. So I think we're starting to kind of get to that next phase of data where we can look at and make sure that data is available to those charge point operators, not just to check the box, not just to say, hey, was Christian successful charging, but to have a little bit of a better indication for what actually took place during that experience. So as a company, and I think as an industry, you were starting to shift our attention, more towards that now to make sure that that's a little bit more fluid.
Yeah. No, I totally can relate to this. That after we have hopefully solved the first time success rate, we will then need more focusing on power levels, right? How much electricity we are getting during the charging session. Is the charging session running as stable as it should? Great points you're raising. Just reflecting a bit on one of your statements you made, Andy, saying that you're running now with 2,000 different charger models in your network, which is quite impressive. I'm wondering all the time by myself why we still see so often also not only small network, but also larger networks adding more complexity to their network by selecting more and more different kind of charger models. Do you have any opinion why this is still happening? Because naturally, the more different models I'm using, the more complex it is to manage all of them, right? Because it's different development cycles, different software deployment times, and then all of these kind of challenges.
That's a terrific question. I kind of wonder the same thing. I do think in the Nordics and obviously in UK where, EV sales are fantastic. You do see a little bit more consolidation of hardware, taking place there. I am sort of surprised with you though, that sometimes just the variability. I think ultimately if you sit down and you ask any charge point operator why, it's because they're trying to find, significant ways to cut costs. I think this is a big year in our industry, right? We have some really, really large charge point operators in Europe and Australia and Japan, and in the United States that are very open with the fact that they're driving towards profitability. And this is kind of the pivotal year. You can look in some of the earnings statements and so, I would surmise that that's putting a lot of pressure on them to find any, to continue to try and commoditize the hardware as quickly as they possibly can to get the overall price point down. But you would expect over time that, that would bottom out, right? And you would end up with, 2 or 3. I don't think we're quite there yet. And I agree with you. The fact that we keep seeing new hardware come into the market shows that, I guess it shows that there's still potential, huge potential growth there as well. Look, at least the good news, Christian, is that, unlike some industries, this industry's done, I think, a really terrific job of adopting open standards for charging, open standards for everything. Having worked in the energy, industry for years, they were terrible about, standardization, which makes that so much more complex. So at least if we're going to get more hardware and they're adherent with open standards, at least it should be, relatively easy for us to integrate that equipment.
Good to hear. That's a great statement. So now we learned a bit that, let's say, basic charging is getting more harmonized, more standardized. That's good to see. How do you see right now level of standardization on smart charging? You mentioned that you also have own activities in this area. Is it already on the same level, or is it still in a very early phase where it's a bit of a wild west and everyone is doing what the company thinks is the right approach?
Yeah, I think we're certainly heading in the same direction as we think about smart charging. I think you get some variability. One of the things that I think leads to that though, Christian, is there's just such differences in charging maturity. It's fascinating to kind of think about, the experience that Europeans have versus, folks in the United States. And so, a lot of that, then sort of sets, expectations as well, right? So, I think, for instance, some parts of the networks in the United States, people are, forget smart charging, they're just happy if they get a charging episode. There's a lot of older equipment. There's a lot of problems. We have much lower reliability. You could say the same, some of the APAC countries as well. So I think, Look, I think this is a push that we need, again, if we kind of go back to what you were describing earlier, if we really care ultimately about that customer experience, then, smart charging and getting, I'd say more consolidation of the thinking there is going to be important. A lot of the companies we work with, we work with a lot of pure play charge point operators, and a lot of folks that deal with, roaming and roaming networks, based on your platform. But we also deal with a lot of really large convenience store companies. And so when you sit down with those really large, companies, while smart charging is certainly the direction they're going, a lot of the feedback we get is about the holistic convenience, C-store experience. And, we already know from companies, all over Europe, like Circle K, Apple Green is a great example, that their focus on that collective experience for the driver, of being able to charge, have that work seamlessly with smart charging, but also convenience, be able to get food, to be able to have internet, is a really big part of the total customer satisfaction. And it's funny, the United States was way behind, and now it seems to be picking up really, really quickly. If you look in the news here, we have, a lot of these large companies like Sheetz or Pilot, and these are companies that are now completely reinventing what that experience, looks like for those drivers. So my only point is some of them are going to put a little bit more emphasis on the retail side of it, versus the absolute charging experience. And you're just going to get some variability, based on, are you a pure play charge point operator, or are you, in the convenience store, market?
Yeah, I think that's a bit connected with the ongoing discussion how much charging and buying chocolate bars needs to belong together, so to say, right? Or not at all.
Yeah.
I totally get the point. Quite often, when you're traveling longer distances, you're also doing breaks in between, right? And using the time for recharging your car to get a coffee or whatever.
Right.
So it makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, of course, then charging becomes a bit of a side business, maybe with all the dependencies. Let's see. I'm really excited about the next couple of years, because then we will better understand which models will scale.
Yeah.
Because I said we are still, let's say, a bit ahead of the mass market environment in Europe. As I said, a couple of European countries are really delivering fantastic numbers in regards of EV adoption. But really also making the breakthrough now in markets like UK, France, Spain, Italy, Germany. I think that will also change a bit the way these business models will be adopted. Very exciting times ahead of us. That's really definitely interesting.
For sure.
One last question on the whole market adoption and issues we're facing right now. If there would be one topic you could influence, you would change, we're saying, if you would do this better, then the whole market will lift up. What would be the topic you would work on?
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of variability to each individual market. It was interesting, Christian. We did a recent, we kind of, contracted a market study where there was over 300 different, charge point operators we interviewed. And not we, it was a third party company. So these weren't all Driivz customers, they were everyone's customers. And we derived some really interesting data from this study and it absolutely surprised me, some of the data. Overwhelmingly, when we asked the question, what's the biggest constraint for you to continue to build out your networks? What came back was, essentially constraints to the grid, to the energy that's out there. And certainly we know in parts of the Nordics, we're already having, real grid congestion. In the United States, we already have some difficulty in some areas. And that same 300 CPOs came back, and I think about 80% of them, said, look, we plan on installing batteries, at sites within the next year. And I knew this was sort of moving at a pretty good pace. I was a little bit surprised that it was that pronounced. And so I think, as I kind of would step back and think about, what should we be really thinking about? Utility companies aren't going to move a lot faster, right? They are what they are, right? I don't think we're going to change that paradigm, overnight. But I do think these charge point operators need to really think about their build out, the way they're doing that, the way they're raising capital, and to really, really take into account energy constraints and what you can do with active energy management to avoid some of those problems. Because what I would hate to see is that, that all of a sudden, the constraint on our industry becomes energy, right? And we're competing against data centers and other things. And it's one of those things if we look back on, 5 years from now and we say, boy, as an industry, we probably could have grown much quicker, which would have helped with more EV adoption, it becomes a great cycle, but we didn't really pay attention to this fundamental problem and therefore it became a constraint. So that's something that, certainly as we're talking with our customers and we're talking to the industry, try and get folks to think about those things. Don't take it for granted that, easy access to energy is going to continue to just not be a problem for us as we move forward.
Yeah, but that is really a really, really interesting point because this is, as you said, a global issue even, right? I don't know any market where this is not one of the core issues right now. And my perspective is that probably this becomes even a bigger issue in the next years because also with the increase of renewable energies, we also will have, let's say, similar limited resources as well, because also all these decentral energy production facilities want to be connected to the grid as well. And then globally, most grids are not yet super smart grids, right? So in best case, you can manage until the transformer station, but what is happening after the transformer is quite often quite invisible, and where you would need to be able to look into this lower level of the grid. And then on the other hand, of course, the whole incentive systems for utilities are normally not reflecting on this because it's still more incentivized to increase the copper plate instead of making your grid more smarter.
Exactly. And you live in a country, Germany, that's done just phenomenal stuff with renewable energy and edge of grid renewable energy. But what Germany and what a lot of countries haven't really done is thought about the orchestration. We have all this renewable energy, especially in Europe, edge of grid, but it's not necessarily really well orchestrated, right? It's very complex for these distribution utilities to think about where that energy sits, how they can optimize it on the grid. And I think as an industry, if we're not careful, we'll become a problem, for them. And what we want to do is, become a solution. So I think these are just things that we want to continue to influence, the charge point operators to think through as they're planning out their growth ambitions.
Yeah, well, definitely. I'm quite often comparing this a bit with the situation we're also facing with some of the more traditional OEMs, which are not yet fully convinced of switching to electric vehicles, right? And I think it's with a couple of utilities at least the same thing, that they think they should better stick to, let's say, the more central way of how the energy systems worked in the past, without seeing the opportunities they can generate by focusing more on decentral renewable energy production. And therefore, we have this mental barriers we still need to overcome. Plus, of course, again, a high level of fragmentation. You probably know it. It's a bit similar to the US model, that you have a lot of municipality-owned utilities in Germany, around about 800. And that, of course, makes alignment also quite challenging as well. You don't think you can overcome this?
Different regulatory stuff, different companies to deal with. Yeah, I think in the United States we're like 3,400 electric companies, so it becomes really, really complex. And every state is regulated a little bit differently. So yeah, these things are challenging, and we're going to use I think most of the projections say by 2030, we're talking about, I think this is excluding China, 30, terawatts of energy as an industry. So it's significant. It's competitive. In Europe, obviously, with the war, you have other constraints from an energy perspective. And so we got to, as a group, we've got to just keep planning for these constraints so that they don't impede, what we want, which of course is, EV adoption.
We need to, because if you're not changing this, as every region, right? It's the same thing for every region. And knowing the European numbers a bit better, but the huge amount of imported orders from the last years is just making Europe very dependent, right? And we now see it again that some of the countries we close contracts with on importing LNG, let's say, not delivering us right now, or at least threatening us to not deliver us. And it also was part of the latest discussions on tariffs as well. So we see that energy becomes one of the, let's say, political ways of putting pressure on regions also. And I think this is where I would say, why not just doing now a big investment into renewable energy? And it takes a lot of time and it's not easy, but it's possible, right? Germany, not overrating here the role of Germany, but last year we've reached 60% renewable energy production, which is
it's incredible.
Quite a lot.
It's incredible. Yeah.
And we are still a society which is based on having a lot of factories and steel mills and all these kind of things all around Germany. So somehow it seems to work out.
You kind of go, if we can solve it in Germany, we can pretty solve it anywhere, right? You've got heavy industrial. It's not exactly sunny every day, right? So, yeah.
I wouldn't say so exactly, but it still works, right? So I don't remember any blackout we have faced because of renewable energy production. But of course, on the other hand, we have seen it in Spain in spring this year, right? Spain has faced a blackout, a massive one, and not saying that this was completely connected with renewable energy production, but it was a bit part of the reasoning. So therefore, I think, as you said, rightfully, we need to also make the grids smarter and invest more into software and technology here as well.
It all started as a small hackathon in 2011. Today, it's the go-to event in EV charging. This September, thousands gather at Berlin's Tempelhof Airport for ICNC 25, a place to connect, exchange ideas, and shape the future of e-mobility. This year's theme, Shaping Customer Experiences. 3 days focused on turning innovation into better charging experiences. From keynote speakers to live demos in the Innovation Zone and Tech Village, see where e-mobility is headed. ICNC 25, September 2nd to 4th, Berlin. Register now at interchargenetworkconference.com.
Let's then start our last part of this podcast today. We would like to discuss a bit more with the listeners and I with you. How do you see right now the latest market developments? We already mentioned it a bit in the beginning that right now there are a lot of activities in place on AI and e-mobility. You shared some great examples how you're incorporating AI into your portfolio. What is your general opinion right now on all the AI startups which are popping up everywhere? Do you value these activities? Or do you maybe also having some concerns about them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now we see a tremendous amount of value. I kind of differentiate, our use of AI in kind of two categories. There's sort of, there's the things we're kind of doing internally to become more efficient, right? The way we use AI to write testing scripts, the way we use AI to automate a lot of this stuff. And just constantly increase the quality of the code. And those are sort of, those are things that we ingest, to just be a more efficient company, right? And to be quicker. And I sort of separate them from a lot of the things that we then do, inside of the actual application, because we're starting to embed and explore AI in all sorts of, aspects of what we do. So we're using AI, I mentioned earlier, for self-healing algorithms. We're using AI to start to think about, what can variable pricing look like, so our CPOs can make better, quicker decisions about what they're doing. And then, you know, I don't know, 5 years ago, some of these networks were relatively small. These networks are now, they're massive. And so a lot of what we, get asked for today is, better, quicker ways of interrogating the data. What's the current, not just what's the current state of my network, but, how do I compare to folks on other networks? How does this charger compare? And so, a lot of what we're doing there today is, opening up aspects of the software so that you can use things like ChatGPT or Claude to ask questions with native human language. I think, this idea that you have to be writing complex, SQL statements to get data is kind of, crazy. And as an industry and as all industries, we're going to be moving away from that where, people like myself who, can't write SQL anymore, can ask very simple questions or very complex questions and get answers back quicker. And so, I see all that as very positive. Having run some really large AI businesses myself, there are parts of it that, give you a little bit of pause. There's problems with AI. There's AI hallucinations. There's issues. There's things there. There's, maybe the reduction of jobs, as you get a little further down the line. But I always come back and I kind of think about, there's so many things that we can do better, right? That, the AI is maybe one more form of better automation that allows us to get better and more efficient, as opposed to sort of, flipping some sort of switch. And so, yeah, it's really augmenting everything we're doing today, both internally and everything we're doing in terms of how we express different aspects of our platform. So yeah, it's a big impact. It's extremely positive for us as a company, and for sure is one of the things that's allowing us to scale as fast as we are.
Yeah, totally. And thanks for your pitch. I really appreciate it. So you're definitely an AI believer. Just one more follow-up question, because I'm also trying right now to get my head around this topic. Take into account that many digital companies are now incorporating AI more and more often. Don't you see this also as a bit of threat to become a bit more comparable with your competitors, because they could do so as well and probably then have access to the same kind of data and same kind of LLMs and so on?
Yeah, I think, that's a fair question. You have to constantly differentiate. And so, the way I kind of think about that is, look, one of the huge advantages that we've got is we're part of Vontier, and this is a really big publicly traded company. And so that gives us a little bit more stability to think about some of these long-term decisions, of which AI is very important. And so, AI just to run our CPMS or AI to improve our CPMS, that's going to become table stakes. You're right. You're absolutely right. Some of that just becomes normal. So maybe, this one looks exactly like that one. But, we're not just Driivz, right? We're Vontier. We're sitting, I don't know, over 70% of every gas pump and every fueling system and every point of sale, right? Through Invenco, the other companies that are part of our corporation. We own that convenience store, experience. And so now you start thinking about those questions that, you and I care about in terms of EV charging and the intersection of that consumer experience and bringing that together with things like customer rewards. We can't just do that with just pure people crunching code. AI is going to have a big part of that. I promise you, we will continue to differentiate at pretty fast scales because, our point of view is not just myopic on one little thing. We're really thinking about, much larger things. So yeah, it's a good point, Christian. I see your point that some things kind of get homogenized over time, but like all companies, the way you the way you differentiate is to continue to really push and drive for, not just new feature functionalities, but ultimately new insights, and data is going to allow us to make those new insights, and sitting on that data and having AI get us to those insights quicker, I think will be really, really differentiating.
I totally agree. And last but not least, I think it's also a bit about the ecosystem as well, right? Most of the examples here used to describe your activities and the activities of Evolve were based on collaborations, close partnerships with your customers. And I think this is also what is definitely a super relevant USP, that companies are trusting you and your services. And I think that's something you can't easily replace with AI as well.
Right.
One of the topics we're also seeing a bit as I would need to say, a global trend. We have great discussions on this topic in Europe, definitely in North America. Exciting things happening there, but also in Asia. A lot of these activities are taking place in India, but also in other countries around. Is commercial vehicle charging or truck charging, electrifying the whole value chain for delivery trucks, long-haul trucks, and so on. And you mentioned a couple of examples of your partnerships working with a lot of retailer stores and so on. What is your positioning right now on commercial vehicle charging? Do you have strong ambitions of theirs? Do you see any future opportunities for your company in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the last year, two of the world's largest, services to fleets have signed on to the Driivz platform, the largest in Europe and the largest globally, that has, over 2 million trucks on their network today. So, we always felt like this was going to become a really important part of what we do. It probably moved at a quicker pace than I would have expected to. I think, Christian, that for a bunch of those companies, the constraints are less political and regulatory, and they're very much focused on total cost of ownership. And so they look at the Driivz platform and they say, well, hang on a second. You guys have already figured out how to manage at-home charging, which, in the United States, as an example, a lot of people take those trucks at home, what you do in a depot, and then, charging in the wild or on the go. And so we need that to be successful with these fleet operators. For us, the fact that, we are managing some unbelievably complex local energy power management, is imperative for those depot owners that they're consuming a lot of energy. So pulling that all together, it has taken off a lot quicker than we would have expected. There are things, of course, that had to really be thought through. Unlike normal on-the-go charging, you do have a lot of complexity around things like reservations. Is there enough energy capacity at the time I need to charge my cars? Being able to integrate with third-party systems, like telematics, right? When those trucks are out there, we want to know the current state of charge, right? We're not a telematics company. Telematics company will decide what the route is, but we do want to know when they come back to the depot, what will be the state of charge that they're at, right? Because that of course falls into the reservation algorithms. So I think that last mile, part of this ecosystem is going to grow really, really quickly. I'm a little bit more skeptical about the long haul trucks, the very heavy. I think I'm not skeptical that it won't happen. I do think it'll happen. I just think that's going to take a little bit longer. But when I look out my window here, I mean, all day long, there's Amazon trucks and other trucks that are, local construction trucks that are already becoming electrified. And they didn't do that, because there was regulatory pressure to do it, because we're in the United States and, this current administration, isn't that supportive. They didn't do that at all. They did it because it just made sense from an economic perspective. So I think if you're a charge point operator, this is the greatest news in the world, because these folks, they're not just going to charge at depots and they're not just going to charge at home. They're going to charge at all three of those use cases. And So yeah, we're really, really excited about that. At the volunteer level, we already do a ton with fleets and these companies that help bring services to fleets. We have a sister company called Angie that deals with compressed natural gas and hydrogen fueling systems. So we have a lot of visibility into what those transitions will look like. And so yeah, we're really pretty bullish that part of the market's gonna pick up considerably.
Thanks for this very exciting summary. That's good to see that you're focusing so much on this. And yeah, I think as you said, the game changers, you're really TCOs, total cost of ownerships. It just makes so much more sense. And just to take it one step ahead, after we solve the grid connectivity issue, most of the depots will probably also produce a lot of their needed electricity as well, right? Because they're big warehouses, they have space for solar panels and so on. So really exciting to see how the future will look like, turning all these depots into renewable energy production facilities. And just to highlight what you already mentioned, customer experience is probably even more important when we talk about commercial vehicle charging, because as I said, for a truck driver, it just needs to work, right? They don't want to hassle around with too many apps and charging cards and stuff like that. It needs to work and it needs to be digitally integrated into the EV ecosystem. Very exciting. Andy, let me allow one last question for our listeners today. As mentioned, you're also participating in the Intercharge Info conference later this year. What is your expectation? What is your maybe question you would like to discuss there at the conference when you and up to 6,000 other participants are meeting for 3 days in Europe talking about eMobility?
Yeah, well, listen, it's for us as a company, it's probably the most important conference there is. It's so the fabric that Object and you guys have built for roaming in Europe is so substantial that there's 100% overlap of the customers, right? So all of our customers care deeply about that roaming experience. And I think, by the way, we're starting to see that evolution in the United States. Obviously we work together with you guys a lot, so we're starting to see that need. And so for us, it's just an incredible opportunity to get there, to listen to customers that are trying to solve complex problems. I think one of the really cool thing about the way you guys have constructed the conference too, Christian, is that a lot of those folks in attendance are technically they're technically competitors, but they all seem very open in terms of sharing what they see as their challenges. And so to answer your question more directly, for us at Driivz, at Evolve, and it gives us a chance to listen to them talk about what their real largest challenges are. Because we make software, and sometimes we kind of get that right, and sometimes we don't get it right. Sometimes we think that the need is something else and we get it wrong. So when we have a chance to come and listen to the incredible speakers, and I know in the past you've had some really terrific folks also that come to give and express the current state of the regulatory environment. We don't get a lot of chances to have all those folks in one place. So yeah, it's a really meaningful place for us to interact, but not just to interact, but to listen and to reflect. Are we doing and are we servicing, the customers in the right way? Because, these folks all have challenges, and some of the challenges maybe we can help with, some of the challenges maybe we can't. I can't speed up permitting with an electric utility company, but I sure as heck can help with that charging experience. That's just an example. And so, yeah, we're really, really excited. We'll have a big contingent. We're looking forward to being in Berlin, and yeah, it's always fantastic.
Thank you for sharing this, and yeah, also a pleasure having you there in place again this year. And yeah, thanks, Andy. Really a great conversation. Thank you very much for sharing all the insights, and I hope you enjoyed it as well.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.